So for those who are not following the news, it's going to hit you really hard, very soon that you got to change your car into something else.
Hi, I'm Olivia Higgins, and this is what you missed in our latest Nico AM webinar. The webinar was held on the 6th of January 2022 with experts Calvin Yeo and Josh Tuang, and we covered the Chinese electric vehicle market. Now, what about Chinese EVFM trends? We covered how and why you should invest early in the Chinese space. Calvin then went into an introduction of the Chinese EVFM ETFs, and also a presentation showed what are the current primary trends and drivers of the Chinese EVFM market. Enjoy.
When you buy into this ETF, it's not just about EVs, it's not just about cars, it's about the whole concept of future mobility. The Chinese consumer market is very adaptable and receptive to EV markets, and this is critical. Without the sales or the consumer acceptance, this market cannot grow, and China just is in that sweet spot. The EVFM market is very real. It's very real in China, it's very real globally in the US and as well as the Europe, where every major country wants to have a pie. Singapore does have a plan to be plugged into this growing industry. We are setting up charging points all over the country. The LTA has plans to set up about 60,000 over the next few years. In China, there are two major government policies which investors should take note of, growing at about close to 100%. I think in last year, the number of sales in terms of units was close to 3 million. That was the target for the industry. That the penetration of EVs within the Chinese car market is really still quite low. Penetration rate here is still about 5 to 10%. The penetration will continue to increase over the next decade or so, and that's a very, very powerful driver. This one costs only $5,000 US. Now $5,000 US, maybe just 110 or 120 of the car's price in Singapore, and it's the top selling EV model for 2021, selling even better than the Tesla Model 3. China produces about 1/3 of the global value in manufacturing. China is also a leader in battery production. You can see that I think just in 2019 alone, they manufactured more than a million batteries. So the batteries are developed unique to the domestic market, the grand plan of future mobility. And the next step for it is to get smarter, for it to talk and interact with its surroundings and drive by itself. Perhaps one day it would be accompanied by a nice little drone, something that you see in fantasy games. I think that reality is not too far away, quite interesting. The grand plan of future mobility is truly grand, and there is a lot of runway and room to grow.
We also learned about the current primary drivers of the Chinese EV sector.
Like any emerging technology sector, government support is very important. And I think China has demonstrated that in many sectors. I can't really think of any other technology sectors out there or investments that is as real, that is gaining traction, and as heavily sought after by major countries globally.
He then went into an understanding of the investments in terms of units of production, like battery components.
So much chemistry that you can explore, so much innovation that is happening in the battery space that is just extremely promising. A lot of the developments that are happening in the battery space within the EV market can actually be applied to the broader energy sector.
Now, a key question that we answered was, as a new investor, why this Chinese space compared to global competitors like Tesla, and whether it's too late? You're about to find out.
China or global, there are many good companies out there, but we think that China has got all the ingredients to make it a success. I think that China has the policies, it has the size, it has the right consumers who will buy, and it also has the manufacturing capabilities to support the whole industry properly. What China is trying to do is not trying to grow an EV company, it's not trying to grow a single Tesla. China is trying to grow its entire industry. Friends who already bought Tesla and they're bragging into me, it's like, oh, I got that great car company and I want to buy, as I made so much about it, but I said, hey, that's just one car company. I wouldn't say that you are the first, but definitely not the last as well.
We then went into how we can utilize our portfolio with the Chinese EVFM market using ETFs.
I ended my presentation by highlighting a bit of risk. I think it's important, although it's not always the best pitch. The China EVFM is high growth, but it's also high volatility. I think really the approach here is to kind of take a portfolio approach to things. And ETFs are actually very, very effective in helping you to achieve that.
And then in terms of valuations, how worried should an investor be about the Chinese credit space or it being too expensive?
Interestingly, the sector is in pretty good health. I just did a check before coming on to the webinar. And from an index perspective, looking at the index, actually all the companies in aggregate that's represented by the index which the ETF will track is in net cash. There has been a lot of negative news coming out from the China credit market overall. Just encourage everyone to understand a little bit more find out a little bit more and understand a little bit more about the China EVFM space.
We then went on to a live demo training by Josh himself. And then to the most exciting part of the webinar, your live Q&A, where we answered some of the key questions for the Chinese EVFM space. Here are some of our favorites.
China has announced last week that by the end of 2022, EV subsidies will be completely removed. Do you see this slowing down the EV sales and the revenue of the underlying stocks?
I'm surprised the amount of focus on subsidies. And really, the answer here is not really. The reason is very simple. The amount of subsidies that's being provided to the China to EVs today in China is actually very small.
But in the end of the day, all the players still need to find a way to survive, but it's without the subsidy.
How can I best diversify my portfolio, both in-app and also through this ETF?
The horizon you want to invest, so which means you're talking about 3 years, 5 years, maybe even 10 years. Then, of course, for the EV now, it's emerging. Then, in order to invest in the ETF, you're talking about diversification.
I think if the question is really asking to compare between Tesla and an ETF, I think the question itself is quite clear. It says that one is a car company and the other one is an entire industry. Even for myself, I would admit that I don't know very much or that deep about the China market, and sometimes just buying a basket does have its benefits.
The software may change the whole, the human behavior. So this actually the EV concept linked to other concepts, and so these become the whole ecosystem.
The shape and form of the China EVFM sector is very manufacturing driven. Chinese consumers are still fairly adaptable to new technologies relative to a lot of old economies. There are surveys and studies done that estimates that China will be the dominant market for autonomous vehicle.
There might be in US, in Europe, we're talking about car. Tesla is a car. But maybe in China, you're talking about BYD or Geely. What they do, actually, they are trying to build a bus or build a truck. So this will bring the whole EV to the new level.
What is the Chinese position with that in terms of, the Chinese market and Singapore market?
Sure. I mean, I think that's very easy to answer from a Singaporean perspective. We are a small country. We want to be part of the supply chain. It will be inclusive, which is consistent with the policy and grand direction of Xi Jinping, I would say.
China will be a very important critical supplier to Singapore. And so Singapore will become the hub, and you can expand to the whole Southeast Asian countries.
Will Singapore have the infrastructure to manage that?
Oh, of course. Singapore has always had world-class infrastructure. If it comes to infrastructure building, I think we definitely can do it if we want to. So for those who are not following the news, it's going to hit you really hard, very soon that you got to change your car into something else. Given how small the country is, there is definitely potential for it to be more decentralized. Personal view here, and I'll be very upfront. I don't think electric cars are green. I'm not fully convinced. But I think electric cars will change the industry and to a certain extent part of the world.
We hope you enjoyed watching the rundown. Now, what do you think of the Chinese EVFM space? Leave a comment down below because I would love to know what you think. For the full webinar, you can click on the links as well to access the full content. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time for future webinars. Bye!